Okay.
Welcome, everyone. We're about to get started. If you're supposed to be in this session, welcome. If you're not supposed to be in this session, you're not where you're supposed to be. It's my great delight to introduce Dr. Denis Halenka to you. And because he's going to introduce himself and his sort of technical resume, I'm going to focus on his brilliance. And that's pulling it back 50%. I promised I wouldn't embarrass him, but I had the great joy of having Denis as my master thesis advisor back in the late 80s and 90s. And even when I was an undergraduate, I was working for him, teaching his labs on how to use digital or technology. Back then it wasn't digital, how to use technology in your classroom. And he's truly been my mentor and has shaped who I am as a teacher for the last, I want to say, 30 years. And it's my great, great pleasure to introduce a man who's going to bring you some really interesting bits of knowledge and wisdom, Denis Halenka.
Thank you. Thank you, Linda. Linda, of course, was one of my best master students that I worked with, and she was able to pick up and move into some fascinating areas in her dissertation and so on, and it was just a delight to work with Linda. To talk about the case against technology may strike you as a little bit of a challenge and a little bit foolhardy in an afternoon and a day that is trying to celebrate technology. What I intend to do is to spend the 40 minutes trying to suggest that there is indeed a case against technology. I'm going to begin with some radical observations, and I think they are quite radical. I'm going to give you a simple definition of technology, a personal definition of technology, so that we can move on. And then we're going to step back into the deep past and look at the mythology of technology. Then we'll move into the 20th century and talk about the media wars of the last half of the 20th century, and looking at especially the case against technology that has been made again and again and again in the literature. And finally, we'll end up in the 21st century and look at some of that literature. A quick acknowledgement of support at the university through the Imperial Oil Academy. And Linda said briefly a few things, but let me just, for those of you who don't know me, I am a professor, a long-time professor at the University of Manitoba in the area of educational technology. I suppose I should say I am a long-time professor of educational technology. I write. I have a book called Paradigms Regained that came out some time ago with a colleague from Ohio State University. I am a columnist for a journal called Educational Technology, which has been around for well over 50 years. My professional affiliation is mostly with the Association for Educational Communications and Technology, of which I am currently on their definitions and foundations committee. Previous to that, I was the president of their research and theory division. So that's very briefly who I am. I guess what I need to say as an introduction that my academic interests are history and pedagogy and philosophy, and so that's the bias from which I will be talking. I am not a technician. I can't set up your computer for you. I am not a systems administrator. I don't know which end is up quite often. But I am not a Luddite. I do use technology, and I love my technologies, but they may be somewhat different than what you think of as technology. So we'll talk about all that, but there's a little bit of my background. So I want to talk then about the case against technology. I'm not going to worry about the case for it, because you hear about that all the time. So let's concentrate only on the downside. I want to make, to start with, 5 radical observations, and I think they're radical, and I think they're even heretical, and I think they go against the grain of popular thinking about technology. You may not think they're so radical. Well, we'll find out. Number 1, there is a case against technology, and it's a strong case. It's not put forth by a few eccentrics and a few people who are disgruntled or a few teachers who don't know how to operate things. It is an important case against technology. This does not mean, however, that we should close down the discussion and put our toys away and do something else. Rather, what it means is that we need to think, we need to reflect, we need to debate. Technology is a complex field. So to examine the case against technology does not diminish our understanding, it enriches our understanding. To examine the case against technology should not make you feel uncomfortable, rather it should make you feel enabled. We need time, as Ellen Rose in a recent Canadian book on technology wrote, a book called On Reflection. We need time to reflect and to think. Just a quick aside, I noticed that if you drink coffee in the cup and you finish it, and then you drink, and then you pour in water, the color is exactly the same as comes out of my tap. Sorry, that's... So, my first observation, there is a case against technology, and it should help in talking about what technology does for us. The second radical observation, and this has been alluded to by several of the presentations so far this morning, there is no one best way. There is no one best technology. There's no royal road. That's what Bring Your Own Device is all about. Yet we keep thinking that we're all going to buy the same thing, the same technology, and we're going to have every student in every school using exactly the same technology. It doesn't work that way. The famous historic story, some of you will know it and some of you maybe not, goes back to Euclid and his work in developing a book on the elements of geometry. It was a book, but not a book as we know it today, 2,000 years ago, and he was all the rage. Everyone wanted to study geometry in the style that Euclid presented it, and the king at the time, who was Ptolemy, he also wanted to learn geometry, and so, and he wanted the best tutor, so he went to Euclid and said, will you teach me geometry? And after a couple of weeks, he got tired of studying geometry. He didn't really couldn't get into it, and so he went back to Euclid and he said, can you give me a shorter way? Can you give me a better way? And the answer from Euclid has gone down in history, and everyone knows it, and he said that there is no royal road to education. An aside on that, perhaps, the idea of a royal road, it comes back to the Persian Empire when the king had to communicate quickly from one end of his empire to the other end of the empire. And often they built two roads. One road went through every... I got to watch this line here, apparently. That's the magic, the flag. There were two roads. One was the road that went through every town and every village and every byway, and that was for everyone. But there was also a royal road, a fast road, a road for kings, a road for the couriers, the king's couriers to travel messages, or to send messages. Herodotus wrote a wonderful quote that people still use in talking about these amazingly fast. They could go from one end of the empire to the other in 7 days, and what Herodotus said 2,000 years ago, there is nothing in the world that travels faster than these Persian couriers. Neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor gloom of night stays these couriers from the swift completion of their appointed roads. That was Herodotus about the royal road of ancient Persia. Well, the idea of a fast route, a quick highway, it permeates our civilization. Here in Canada, of course, we started with the national dream of the Transcontinental Railroad, moving to the Transcontinental Highway, the Trans-Canada Highway, which is still a part of the glue that holds our country together. Well, back to our bottom line. What Euclid said was that there may be a royal road for transportation and a royal road for communication, but there is no royal road for learning. There is no one best technology. There is no master medium. They all have their place. My third radical observation. Technology is personal. You choose the technology that best suits your needs and the technology that you like. I need glasses. And by the way, in terms of new technologies, we can call this a wearable technology. That's the new thing these days, wearable technologies. We used to have wristwatches. Wristwatches are a wearable technology. I don't have one. That's disappearing. But technology is personal. I like vinyl, you like CDs, someone else likes MP3s. That's okay. There's room for all of them. You like e-readers and I like books. That's okay too. One is not better. You can have your technologies, let me have mine. The choice of technologies is personal. Number 4, technology costs. It costs money, it costs time, costs energy. It's not free. We spend $2 million here for an iPad project and $15 million there, and we need this. But typically that means that we use taxpayers' money to spend on the one hand, and we have to take something away. Right now, the federal government is taking away institutional libraries. Libraries are disappearing because we need something else. So technology costs, and there is a loss as we move along. And maybe the most radical observation of them all is this one, that the research seems to show, and we'll more about this later, that technology maybe won't increase learning anyway. It doesn't matter if you use it or you don't use it, or you use this one or you use another one. Another quick aside, just before I move on. The debates about technology, they do need to be real debates, not polemics and not manifestos. For example, we understand nowadays, we all understand that bullying and name-calling is unacceptable. You don't do that. And yet, the pro-technology camp, especially, the other ones a little bit, especially the pro-technology camp, they do it all the time. They call the other side, they call them Luddites, they call them techno-peasants, they call them late adopters, they call them laggards, and the worst term of all, you know what you call people? You call them immigrants. Digital immigrants, but immigrants. Well, you know, that's name-calling, that's bullying, that's what we say that we don't want to do. We want to advance the discourse. We want to show that there is a case against in order to build the case that we have. And if you can't take the case against, we need to rethink perhaps where we are. So, just a couple more introductory kind of comments. We need a definition of technology. Everyone uses the word technology. We don't always define exactly what we mean. So a couple very simple definitions. There are, and you can go to the literature and you can get really complicated, complex definitions. That's fine. But here's a couple simple ones. I call them folk definitions. If God didn't invent it, then it's technology. And if you are a little more secular than that, you don't want the religious side, then if it's not nature, then it's technology. What those definitions do is they expand the idea of technology to make you realize that technology is not just something that has been invented since about the year 2000. Technology is not a 21st century phenomenon. Technology has always been with us. My other explanation to my undergraduate students is, again, a very personal definition of technology. And what I like to tell them, and again, this is my definition. You won't find this in the literature. But consider a book. That's a technology. Make it YouTube if you want. Make it Wikipedia. It doesn't matter. But you have a text. And if you ask the question, where is the data? Where is the information? The answer is fairly obvious. It's in the book. So the book is an information technology. It holds information. But on the other hand, if you take this is a technology too. It's a pen. It's a felt pen. It's a highlighter. Okay, but it doesn't matter. Pen, pencil, whatever. If you ask the same question, where's the information? Where's the data? It's not, unlike this one, it's not here. The information is not in the pen. We're not quite sure where it is. It's somehow between my brain and through my arm and into my hand and onto the paper, maybe, and into the book. And the reason we can't say exactly where the information is because it's a different kind of communication, a different kind of technology. It's a communication technology. So we have two types: information technologies, which hold information; communication technologies, which transmit information. We sometimes put it together as ICT, information and communications technology. And we have that combination. What's important here is that technology doesn't do just one thing. And by the way, I'm going to be using the word media and technology synonymously too, just to add to the confusion. So I want to look briefly at the mythological era, into the late 20th century, into the 21st century, and look at the case against technology in each case. Let's go back historically. We've already been to Euclid, but let's go back into ancient Greece and spend some time there. And I won't go over all of these. This is this is a whole course to talk about the mythological examples of technology and how it doesn't work. Pandora, who had a black box, who thought it was full of goodies, turns out to be full of horrors. The Daedalus and Icarus flying too close to the sun on wax wings, the Tower of Babel, Prometheus' gift of fire, Shelley's Frankenstein that was supposed to be a new human, turned out to be a monster. Even in the creation story of the Mayans, they talk about that the kitchen utensils were so badly treated, they were burned and they were hit and they were everything was done to them. They finally revolted in that story. Well, we're going to jump right back, right by all of that, and look at only one example because it's an absolutely fascinating one. Many of you will know the story from Plato, from Phaedrus, which tells of one of those early technologies. And again, since we can talk about technology in terms of it's not nature, then it's technology, and we can go before the 21st century. Plato talked in his book called Phaedrus of the beginnings of the technology of writing. And this takes us right back to the ancient storytellers, the very beginnings of Thoth, the inventor, who came to the king, whose name was Thamus, and he came to the king saying, hey, I invented writing, and this is going to be a wonderful new technology. And he says, this is in the words of Plato, he says, this technology will make Egyptians wiser and will improve their memories. My invention is a recipe for both memory and wisdom. Plato, through Thamus, or actually Thamus through Plato, written in the words of supposedly Socrates, had a gorgeous answer. And this is maybe one of the first examples of a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, or a McLuhan's laws. What does it enhance? What does it diminish? And so on. The king was able to say, hey, Thoth, you're wrong. This isn't a great invention. And in fact, his comment was, he says, this invention, this technology of writing, will produce forgetfulness. Now, this is 2,000 years ago. Will produce forgetfulness in the souls of those who learn it. They will not need to exercise their memories, being able to rely on what is written, calling things to mind no longer from within themselves by their own unaided power, but under the stimulus of external marks. They're alien to themselves. So, writing is not a recipe for memory, but for reminding. And as for wisdom, you're equipping your pupils with only a semblance of wisdom and not with real truth. They can't think for themselves. Sounds like Wikipedia, what we're arguing about today. 2,000 years ago, he was critiquing and doing a wonderful job of it. Thanks to you and your invention, your pupils will be widely read, but without the benefit of a teacher's instruction. In consequence, they'll entertain the delusion that they have wide knowledge, while in fact they are for the most part incapable of real judgment. They'll also be difficult to get on with since they have become wise merely in their own conceit. Plato, 2,000 years ago, already critiquing. Technology is not automatically good. It may be also problematic. Well, between that last slide and this one, you have to imagine a Prezi where we back up, we zoom around, twist over, and we come down into the late 20th century. Everyone can imagine Prezi. What's happening? I don't want to say quite today because this is the late, since about the 1970s and on. Well, so that I don't get off. There's so many studies that have taken place since the 60s, 70s, 80s, and so on about technology that what I want to do is give you some red herrings, some things to watch out for in the literature that exists, signs of flawed research. So as you look at all of this research, which is all over the place, watch for these. Here's the problems. Here's where the research doesn't quite ring true. And I've got five things to watch out, 5 warning signs, 5 red herrings. Number one, watch out for testimonials. When the research starts to say that I use Prezi, or worse yet, when it's a celebrity that gives the testimonial. Secondly, watch out for sponsored research. Apple has an interest in Apple products. IBM wants you to buy IBM computers. The smartboard people think that smartboard should be in every classroom. Yeah. Marketing is not research. Marketing is advertising. And advertising disguised as research is all over the place, but it's still not research. Number three, watch out for overgeneralizations. You do a small study and you found out that in your study it improves learning by 21.5%. Well, then you can't generalize that to the world and say this is going to improve learning by 21.5%. You can't do that. You can't overgeneralize. I got to watch where I'm standing. I know. This is some kind of a magic line here. There should be a beeper there. What else? Vague terminology improves learning. I love to say that. Technology improves. What's learning? Is it memory? Is it recall? Is it activity? Is it cooperative work? What's learning? You can't say, not to that matter, for that matter, as I said at the beginning, what's technology? But watch out for this use of vague technology and avoid affective findings. This is interesting, but we love to do the research and say simply, students liked blogs. Students believed that Prezi resulted in better learning. Students preferred, well, okay, but it doesn't mean that they did it. So watch out for these, and they're all over the place. Research loves affective findings. This is how we market, and this is how we advertise. This is not how we do research. A couple of the old famous, look at it. Don't look at it from there. A typewriter can raise marks up to 38%. Yeah. Or Bill Cosby says you should get the Texas Instruments 992 personal computer. Yeah, but those are some of the flaws. This is not research. This is advertising. Of all the studies in this era, the most interesting is a guy named Richard Clark and his nemesis, Robert Kozma. And Clark in particular suggests again and again in his writings, and he's got many, that technology doesn't work. What he did meta-analyses of all the studies that were out there, and look at this. He wrote his most famous line that the best current evidence is that media are mere vehicles that deliver instruction, but do not influence student achievement any more than a truck that delivers groceries causes changes in our nutrition. Now, if he's right, that's interesting. It should make us rethink how we use technology, when we use technology, why we use technology. Along with a colleague of his, Gabriel Salomon, this brown water is good. Together they say that past research on media has shown quite clearly, this is dramatic, that no medium enhances learning more than any other medium, regardless of learning task, learner traits, symbolic elements, curriculum content, or setting. Doesn't matter. Now, you don't have to agree with them, but it's an interesting start. And let's leave that one. To sum it up, in 1994, Clark's comment, just in the title of one of his articles from Educational Research and Development Journal, 1994, media will never influence learning. Bang. Robert Kozma took the other side, and he wrote, he argues that media does influence learning. I like this one because Kozma quotes me in the third line there, so that's the only reason I show that. But he says that our field is re-examining our foundational assumptions, and he says in about line 5 or 6 in the middle, if we move from do media influence learning to in what ways can we use the capabilities of media, then we're maybe on the right track. And the debates between Kozma and Clark are voluminous in the literature, they're fascinating reading, and even though they began in the 1970s, they go right through to today, and the latest one came out just last year in 2012 by Richard Clark, called Learning from Media, Arguments, Analyses, and Evidence, and it brings it up to the 21st century. So a fascinating set of studies suggesting that we need to think very carefully on what media and what technology does to learning. Now, they're not the only ones. Clark is not the only one who has drawn this suggestion that we need to watch out. If we go back a little bit earlier to the era of television, and if you can remember back in the 60s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, television was seen to be that magic bullet that was going to change the classroom, that teaching would be universal, it would be perfect, everyone would learn from television, every student would have, we'd teach by television in the classrooms, kids would have television in their homes, you couldn't go wrong. Television was the solution to quality education. And after all the studies, and pulling it all together, and that's what Schramm did. He pulled together all the studies about television and children, and the best he was able to come up with was this very famous statement. He said, for some children, under some conditions, some television is harmful. For other children under the same conditions, or for the same children under other conditions, it may be beneficial. But for most children under most conditions, most television is probably neither particularly harmful nor particularly beneficial. Take out the word television, put in blogs, put in Facebook, put in YouTube, whatever you want. And it probably translates fairly well. So, I don't even have 15 minutes. I'm obviously talking very fast. I'll try to slow down. I'm good, okay. So, we talked about early literature and Plato, talked about what happened in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, and now we're into the current era. And again, the literature is full of exemplars that argue that we should at least take a close look. Not to say that we should throw it out. None of this is saying we should throw out technology. That is not the message. But rather the message is that we need to look at the other side. We need to have a critical debate to reflect what's going on. So there's all kinds of studies, and I'll just give you a handful of them. I'll throw them all up, and here's some of them. Most of these are from the year 2000 and beyond. There's one of them, number 4 down, is Robert Lanning in 1994, who says this whole argument in favor of educational futures needs to be rethought. A lot of these titles are, the answer to their thinking is almost in the titles. So Lanier, Jaron Lanier, who is one of the inventors of artificial intelligence, argues you are not a gadget. You know, we are more than a thing. We are people. We have our own ideas. We make our own decisions, and that's the basis of what he's trying to say. Nicholas Carr, in the Atlantic Monthly, wrote his famous book or article called "Is Google Making Us Stupid?" And his answer was yes, it is. He wrote a book following up on this called The Shallows, which some of you may have seen, which follows up in more detail on that. Tom Standage has just come out about two months ago with something called The Writing on the Wall. And what The Writing on the Wall says is that, hey, we've always had these technologies. They are not new. They have never made a difference before, and they're not going to make any difference now. Karen Fernending actually begins her book. There's a typo there. It should be, the 3 is stray. It's the year is 2001. Her book is called Questioning Technology. And that's exactly what we need to do. We need to question technology and not swallow it hook, line, and sinker. Larry Cuban, back in the 1990s, actually, I say his latest version was 07. I think that date is a little bit wrong. But he argued, he's talking about the classroom. He says that computers in the classroom are underused and they're oversold. The same point that was made by Clark, same point that's made by so many of these people. And I don't have an author for the Fred Rogers Center for Early Learning, but they suggest the same thing. They say in the classroom, in the young classroom, watch out. Think about what you're doing. It's not automatic. And again, that's maybe the main message that comes again and again, that it's not automatic. Sure, these things they can do a lot. Technology is wonderful. Again, I love my technologies. I love what I do with my technologies, but that doesn't mean that everyone should do it in the same way and do the same thing. And Ellen Rose, her latest book that just came out last year called on reflection, and the subtitle is The Role of Technology in Education. We need to think about what we do. So Lanier, for example, Lanier, he's an American, and I want to somehow give it a French Lanier. It's not a Lanier, it's a Lanier, sorry. Anyway, Jaron Lanier argues in his most important book, and let me get you the fuller quote than I have in there. Somewhere I have, yeah. He said something started to go wrong with the digital revolution around the turn of the 21st century. The World Wide Web, he says, was flooded by a torrent of petty designs, sometimes called Web 2.0. Interesting to call Web 2.0 a petty design. He says this ideology promotes radical freedom on the surface of the web, but that freedom, ironically, is more for machines than for people. Nevertheless, it is sometimes referred to as open culture. I'm still quoting Lanier. He says blog comments, video pranks, lightweight mashups may seem trivial and harmless, but as a whole, this widespread practice of fragmentary impersonal communication has demeaned interpersonal interaction. And we heard a little bit about that in the last presentation, that there is a dark side, and what we think may be good may in fact demean communication. So what I've been trying to do is to suggest to you and to set up a case for looking at the other side of technology integration, because critical thinking requires that we look at all dimensions and not just plow ahead in one way only. And I've tried to show you that the case against technology is not restricted to a few eccentric heretics, but it's been with us forever. It's been with us since Plato and since Euclid and into contemporary literature in the 20th century, 21st century literature. This is not something that just a few are interested in. So I don't know whether there's a solution to this, and I don't know whether I'd be so bold as to suggest one. I mean, there are many directions that we can go, but one interesting study comes from David Edgerton in a book called The Shock of the Old. It came out in the year 2000, and what he suggests and what he advances is that we need to consider technology in use. We need to look at how technology is actually being used, not technology as innovation, but technology that we actually use. He says go into a classroom and actually take a look at what's being used at a given point in time. Choose 15 minutes into the class and go and take a look and see what's happening. What exactly is the technology in use? And he says what we'll find is that history is changed when we put into it the technology that counts. Not just the spectacular technologies, but the low and the ubiquitous technologies. The historical technology, he says, the historical study of things in use and the use of things matters. In other words, we're not interested, put it the other way, we are interested. We're interested in, not in new technologies, but we're interested in significant technologies, things that will make a unique contribution. And our accounts of significance have been strongly influenced by innovation-centric and innovation-biased research. We don't need to always think about what's new. Every teacher shouldn't be an innovator. There's room for innovators. There's people to do the best job they can with what they've got. And if you come into a classroom that has no smartboard and no projector and no microphones and only a set of tables and chairs, you've got to work with what you've got. You can put in a request for more technology, for more money, for more whatever, but you work with what you've got. It's the technology that you have rather than the technology that you might have. And this becomes important as we start to think about the role of technology. Some of you know the name of whom? Neil Postman. Postman, in his original studies, he wrote two interesting books. His first book that brought him fame was called Stand By the Flag. His first book was called Teaching as a Radical Activity. And he argued that when things are sort of going in a normal way, teachers need to be ahead of the flow and they need to be radical. And it's a good idea. But then he wrote his second book, and he said, he changed his mind. He said, well, you know, that's fair enough, but he said his second book was called Teaching as a Conservative Activity. And this time he said, you know, when things are way ahead, when everything is moving really fast ahead, we need teachers to be conservative, to think of the history, to think of what we have done, to look at the past. So the answer is both ways. You need to be radical, you need to be conservative. And that's what the technology in use model tries to show. So,
you're watching that clock, it's 5 minutes fast. So you have time.
I have time. I'll read this really slowly. What I've tried to do in 40 minutes, cut down to 30 minutes, and in fact in only 35 minutes, is to bring out the research that has existed since the very beginning of time, since the very beginning of technology. And it turns out that that research is a double-edged sword. Technology gives us great gifts and great opportunities, but it was James Burke who said that it also takes away our soul. It does take away things. And the odd thing is that we don't quite recognize it. We've always known that there is a need to think carefully and critically about the technologies that we invent. And throughout history, there are traces of people having said just that. I have one other quotation that comes from Euripides, 428 BC. I mean, you would think, how can that be of any interest at all to us? But way back, 428 BC, he wrote, he says, "You people with such great futility, you get it all wrong. Why do you invent and devise all manner of things, but you still do not know a single way to teach wisdom?" It does say 428 BC. It could be 2014. We do want to teach wisdom. We want to get things across to the students. We want them to know the past. We want them to know their culture and their history, as well as using the new technologies to make a difference. I suggested at the beginning that I see technology divided into two directions, technology for information, which has the content, which holds the content like a book does, but also technology for communication. Those are different. Information and communications technologies, we need both of them. Technology, so, and we seldom talk about that. When we're talking about technology for communication, that's fine, to get something across. When we're talking about technology as information, to store facts and knowledge and wisdom and so on, that's something else. There are two very distinct uses of technology. So my suggestion, I guess, is that we need perhaps to think about our use of technology, our thinking about technology. We don't need to make all educators and all schools and all divisions to be innovators and early adopters. That tilts the balance to one way. We want learning. We want good learning, however it comes. We need the innovators. Let them innovate. But we also need to teach and to support the technologies that teachers use, whatever that technology might be. If the lights go out and the power goes off, we can still teach, and students can still learn. We need a model then that celebrates technology in use. And I guess so we need to recognize the case against it. We shouldn't hide it, we should embrace it. We need to consider the technology in use model. And I guess my final comment is that we need to talk about what technology does for teachers, but we also need the opposite to know what technology does to teachers. We need to know what curriculum does for teachers, and also what the new curriculum will do to teachers. We need to know what learning does, contemporary 21st century learning does for teachers. We need to know what the contemporary learning does to teachers and students. And with that, thank you. I'm open for questions. Linda.
If Marshall McLuhan were here today, what would he say is the message of the medium of the internet and today's modern information technology?
Marshall McLuhan likes to observe, and I think his first thing would he would say simply that he.
Could you repeat the question?
Oh, repeat the question. What would Marshall McLuhan say today? Or do you want Linda to repeat it?
Go ahead.
Either one. I think Linda's question was, if she can clarify it further, what would Marshall McLuhan say to all of this? McLuhan's so interesting because he's a Canadian theorist.
I'm going to interrupt and say, no, that was my question. What would he say is the message?
Ah.
You know, if the medium is the message, and I know you obviously know what that means, what is the message that the internet is delivering to us as the masses?
I think his first comment would be to say that we need to simply sit back and observe what's happening. He likes to probe. He likes to suggest one thing. He'll maybe take back his probe. He'll say something else. I think that he would certainly see the message that the internet is conveying, and that the new technologies are conveying, is an all-at-onceness to our society, which is so typical of what we do today and what we see today, and sometimes we need to see it in a much more holistic concept. Let me, as an aside, comment for those of you who don't know McLuhan well. I do tend in my undergraduate classes, I spend a unit on Marshall McLuhan, which my undergraduates, half of them understand and half of them, that's where I get the negative comments. What in the world has Marshall McLuhan got to do with communication? They love to ask. I can't get through to all of them. But McLuhan is about communication. He's especially important to us because he's a Winnipegger. Although he was born in Edmonton, he spent his early years he did all his elementary schooling in Winnipeg. He spent his secondary schooling in Winnipeg. He went to the University of Manitoba. So here's one of the gurus, one of the leading voices in technology and new technologies. And even though he died in 1980, his ideas are coming back, and his thinking about technology is becoming so important. He got all his formative learning from here. You know, what in the world did his early years and middle years teachers teach him that made him then go out and say the medium is the message? What made him think about the global village living in Winnipeg, which is about as insular a place as you could be in the 1930s, where he came when he was here? McLuhan is a fascinating individual for us because he's one of us. He is a Winnipegger who has really made a difference in the world of technology, and we sort of ignore him. We don't know about him. He's celebrated in Edmonton, he's celebrated in Toronto and around the world, but here in Winnipeg, we don't know too much. I had a student in one of my courses, and in her blog assignment, we write blogs. That's a new technology, sorry, but I have them write blogs anyway. Anyway, so she wrote in her blog, she was actually absolutely amazed that we talked about McLuhan, and she says, you know what? She says, I forget the name of the street, I think it was Gertrude Avenue that he lives on. She says, I live on 1 block away from Gertrude, and I never knew that we had such an important person that lived 1 block away from where I live. And she says, I walk my dog past his house every day, and I never knew. And she now has a new wonder of what happens here in Winnipeg. I better stop. Anyone else with a question?
On that list of books in post-2000, I'd like to mention a book that I've just worked through. It's by Gilles Slade. It's called The Big Disconnect, Technology and Loneliness.
Okay.
And he traces how technology has interrupted human contact. And he starts with things like vending machines, how vending machines made unnecessary human contact with the guy who was selling the newspaper down at the corner. And he talks about incidental social contact and how that is what builds an empathic society. He eventually gets to what we've been talking about today, but he talks about how technology, through radio, early radio houses had one radio, and people would gather around the one radio, and then they figured out that if they make little portable radios, every person in the family could have their own little radio in their bedrooms and so on. And so that technology began disintegrating family contact and so on. So I'd add that to a list to consider.
Good one. And the title again?
The Big Disconnect.
The Big Disconnect.
By Gilles Slade. 2012. It's quite recent book.
Just out. Interesting. I don't know
Technology and loneliness.
Okay. And there's so many that keep doing that. Other thoughts or questions from anybody? Again, what I'm not trying to say, let's close down the discussion and let's put away our toys or technology. I'm saying that we need to have some idea of what the other research is. It's a huge piece of research, or huge pieces of research. It goes back as far as you want to go back. It goes right into the present, and it's always there. And we typically tend to ignore it. We want to know how to do something, and we forget sometimes to ask the question as to why we're doing it. And it really is important to look at the big picture as we look at technology. Technology is wonderful. I love my technology. If I didn't have technology, I wouldn't have been able to get here today. I love my entertainment technologies, but I don't like putting something in my ear. Sorry. I do love vinyl. I like old records that are on vinyl recordings of jazz. I really think there is something unique, and maybe that's just me, what do I know? But they're starting to resell these things. Vinyl is coming back. You don't have, I hate MP3s, because MP3s, if nothing else, don't give any notes. Records, LPs used to give huge documentation about what you were listening to. You didn't just listen, but you read about it, and you learned about it. Now you just listen. I don't want to do that. I want to know what I'm listening to. So I like vinyl, I like LPs, I like other formats. That's my entertainment area. That's okay. If you want MP3s, go ahead. Put them on your ear and lock it up and walk around and walk down the railroad track, and that's fine. I don't do that. But we need to look at the other side, and that's what I tried to do today, to look at the case against technology. Last comments? No more comments. 1 minute. Closing. Going. Thank you, everyone.